Okay, so now we're about a third of the way through the 10 commandments of conflict resolution. When we do this in a workshop, there's a lot more detail, there's a lot more case studies, there's a lot more examples. Yeah, but in this type of medium, you've only got 3 to 4 minutes to pick up each of the points. So it's important that we summarize, because there's been a lot of psychological terms and psychological theorems put forward. So let's just do that. Let's just summarize the first 3 segments on this conflict resolution training. If you want to resolve conflict, most conflict is based on ignorance. Both parties are ignorant about what the other person says, thinks, and feels. Why? Because literally speaking, they're not listening. And they're not listening because they're stuck in their own perspective. They have their own filters on. And why are they stuck in their own perspective? Because, psychologically speaking, it's self-preservation. And self-preservation is ingrained in each of us. We don't want to be abused. We don't want to be misused. We don't want to be taken advantage of. So what we tend to do is we dig in our heels to our own perception. But my perception, if I'm in conflict with you, is going to be different from your perception. And now we have a conflict of perception. This is right out of the TED Talk. If we have a conflict of perception, then the conflict's never going to be resolved. We have to actually switch sides. I have to see things from your perspective. You have to see things from my perspective. And the only way that's going to happen is if we give the time and careful consideration to how the other party is thinking and to the words that they're saying and how they're saying them and the emotional component of it as well as the mental component of it. So this is why it's important to get the backstory. When you're trying to resolve a conflict, if you've got 2 parties and she says he's a bad guy and he says she's a bad gal, well, that doesn't get you anywhere. They both insist that they're right. They both insist that the other party is wrong. You need to get the backstory. So what you're effectively doing is you're sitting down with the parties that are at war with each other, and you give them each the opportunity to say, tell me how this came about. In other words, you're saying, tell me a story. Now, this part's very important. If I'm in conflict with another coworker, okay, so Dr. Kevin is in conflict with Dr. Karen, okay, and you're the person that's resolving this problem, then if you give Dr. Karen the opportunity to tell her backstory and I interrupt, you need to shut me down. There is no interruption in the backstory. Dr. Karen gives her backstory and she can take as long as she needs. Once Dr. Karen is finished with her backstory, you, because you're the conflict resolution guru now, you are going to say, Dr. Karen, are you finished? And she goes, yep. And then you say, Dr. Kevin, could you please explain to Dr. Karen what you heard her say? And see, that's a test for me. That's a test to see if I was actually listening. And when you, as a conflict resolution guru, start to use this particular tool, you're going to teach everybody that is under you, everybody that's your subordinate, everybody that has to answer to you, everybody who's subject to your authority. You're going to teach them, wow, when I'm dealing with the boss here, she listens. And she listens to each party. And she makes sure that the parties aren't in antagonism because she's going to make sure that the parties are both listening. See, I now have to repeat back, to the best of my ability, what I think Dr. Karen said. And if I've done that correctly, now it's my turn to give my backstory. But Dr. Karen's going to have to repeat back what she perceives I said. When you allow both parties to give their backstory, you're going to figure out very quickly who's listening and who isn't. So at the beginning of this clip, I said that most conflict doesn't get resolved because people aren't listening, and that sounds really simplistic, but it isn't simplistic at all, because truly, in most conflict situations, people are not listening to the other party. They're only listening to their own thoughts. So what you're going to do is you're going to help people become more disciplined, more trained to listen to the other person, because as I said in an earlier clip, most of the time we have conflict, it's because there's a miscommunication that leads to a misunderstanding, and when we have a misunderstanding, that leads to conflict. So when we're miscommunicating, we're actually thinking and feeling out of ignorance. We're not aware as to how the other person is perceiving the situation. So when their perception's different from ours, there's the conflict. We have a conflict of perception, we call it in psychology. And you can help solve the ignorance problem by getting people to give their backstory and then have the party that they're in conflict with repeat back what the backstory is, just to ensure that each party is actually listening to themselves. And that is going to prove to be almost miraculous, but not as miraculous as the next thing we're going to teach you.